Picture this. You're sitting on your porch, sipping your morning coffee, not bothering a soul, when out of nowhere a woman in spotless yoga pants struts up your driveway. She's got two nervous men in tow, clutching clipboards like they're hostages, and before you can ask what's going on, she shoves a paper in your hand. A bill. Not for groceries, not for utilities, no, a demand for nearly $4,000. That surreal moment became my reality when Karen Whitmore, yes, her actual name was Karen, decided my off-grid cabin was somehow ruining her precious homeowners association's property values. My land had stood here since 1987. Her HOA wasn't even dreamed up until 2019. There I stood in the middle of my gravel driveway, the crisp fall air carrying the tang of fresh asphalt from the road crews working nearby. Karen's sharp, high-pitched voice bounced off my metal garage door like nails on a chalkboard. In one hand I held my original deed, the legal proof of my ownership dating back decades, and in the other I gripped the piece of nonsense paperwork she claimed gave her power over me. A gust of wind rustled both sets of documents, almost as if nature itself was laughing at her absurdity. Now tell me, what would you do if someone showed up waving fake authority, trying to take your land? Drop your wildest HOA nightmare down below. And let me know where you're tuning in from. I'm willing to bet half of you have seen firsthand how power-hungry neighborhood associations operate. My name's Jake Riverside. This is the story of how two of the hardest years of my life turned into the most unexpected fight for justice I never thought I'd have to wage. Let's roll back to 1987. I was just 25, a young electrician with rough hands and a head full of ambition. I scraped together every dime I had, $47,000, and bought 2.3 acres of untouched Colorado prairie. It was nothing but raw land back then. No house, no utilities, no roads. Just wide open sky and possibility. Over the next 15 years, I poured sweat and soul into turning that bare dirt into something special. I built a modest cabin, fully off-grid, powered by solar panels. I pieced together a workshop, the kind of place every tinkerer dreams about, filled with renewable energy projects and tools collected over a lifetime. I planted gardens that could have fed half the county, rows of vegetables that grew taller and stronger with each passing season. My late wife, Sarah, was my partner through it all. She adored this land as much as I did. Every evening, we'd sit together on the porch, listening to the prairie winds, dreaming up additions and improvements we never quite got around to building. We thought we had all the time in the world. But cancer had other plans. 2 years ago, it took her, leaving just me and my loyal dog, Voltage, a rescue mutt I named after the trade that paid for all of this, to carry on. I've kept Sarah's spirit alive out here ever since. Every nail in the walls, every plant in the soil, has her touch on it. For decades, my cabin stood quietly on the edge of the original county road, surrounded by wide-open grasslands. But about 5 years back, a California developer showed up with visions of turning our valley into some postcard-perfect gated community. He carved up the land, poured concrete, and stamped out Meadowbrook Estates, a sprawling development of 400 shiny homes, manicured lawns, fake ponds, and buyers dropping up to $800,000 for a slice of suburban fantasy. And right in the middle of all that polished perfection, my humble off-grid setup. To them, I wasn't a neighbor, I was an eyesore. But here's the detail: the developers, and later, Karen, never accounted for. County records clearly excluded my parcel from every single development agreement. Back in the 80s, the surveyor marked my land with bright flag stakes labeled exempt. I've got photos, permits, and a 35-year-long paper trail to back it all up. Nobody bothered to tell Karen Whitmore. She arrived 2 years ago, fresh from Orange County, just as I was burying Sarah. She was 47 then, a real estate agent who wasted no time climbing the ladder to HOA president. Picture the type: spotless white BMW, always polished, somehow allergic to dirt roads. 3 kids in expensive private schools. A husband who ran a chain of dental practices. And the kind of entitlement that only comes from living a life where nobody's ever told you no. She was infamous for her pettiness. Measuring neighbors' lawns with a ruler. Filing official complaints if someone's trash bin sat visible more than an hour past pickup. Her perfume was so aggressive it could knock a buzzard off a garbage truck. Our first meeting seemed innocent enough. She flashed a sweet smile, waved like she belonged there, and introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Karen with the Homeowners Association. Just conducting a survey about neighborhood improvements." I gave her a polite nod. Figured she was just nosy. Boy, was I wrong. 3 days later, she was back, with reinforcements. 2 guys in polo shirts trailing behind her, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Karen strutted down my gravel driveway, heels clicking like a metronome, binder in hand. "These solar panels," she announced loudly, pointing like a prosecutor, "are dragging down property values by $50,000 per house. You have 30 days to comply with our architectural standards or you'll be fined $100 per day." I calmly reached into my files and handed her my original 1987 deed. It clearly stated, in black and white, that my property was excluded from all future HOA regulations. She barely glanced at it from behind her oversized sunglasses. "Legal loopholes won't protect you forever," she said, lips curling. "This is about community standards and property values." I took a deep breath, remembering the calm voice Sarah always used when bad news came from the doctor. "Ma'am," I said evenly, "this land has been here 32 years longer than your HOA. I'm not part of your association." Her smile froze, turned brittle, then cold. "We'll see about that." She spun on her heel and marched back to her BMW. The sound of gravel crunching beneath her designer heels felt less like footsteps and more like a countdown clock starting. The very next morning, my instincts proved right. I woke up to the sound of voices outside. 3 contractors with measuring tapes and cameras were along my fence line, snapping photos, muttering about boundary discrepancies. "What do you think you're doing on my land?" I demanded. They shrugged. "Karen sent us. Said we had to document violations." Violations? On property that had stood longer than their entire subdivision? That's when I understood, this wasn't about grass length or trash cans. This was about control. Karen Whitmore thought she could strong-arm me into submission. She couldn't have picked a worse target. Sarah always told me I was too stubborn for my own good. And she was about to be proven right. 2 weeks after that little measuring tape stunt, the harassment escalated. My mailbox turned into Karen's personal delivery service of threats. First came a county complaint claiming my land violated new residential zoning requirements. I laughed out loud when I read it. Agricultural zoning doesn't just vanish because someone builds a few McMansions next door. Next came an official HOA letter, printed on expensive letterhead, demanding I pay $500 a month in dues, retroactive all the way to 2019. That added up to nearly $2,000 for an association I never joined. Still not satisfied, Karen circulated a petition in the neighborhood. According to her, my workshop was a safety concern. My 40 years of electrical experience, she claimed, made me a public menace. Her petition declared my solar batteries were a ticking time bomb and my tools a source of dangerous noise pollution. Clearly, she'd never stood near an actual construction site at 7 in the morning. But the final straw? Facebook. Karen posted photos of my property in the Meadowbrook Estates community group, painting me as a non-compliant neighbor dragging everyone down. She took the pictures from the window of her BMW, cropping them to make my tidy workshop look like a junkyard. Within hours, 63 neighbors I'd never even met were calling me an eyesore and demanding something be done. The sting of betrayal mixed with my morning coffee as I scrolled through the comments. That's when I decided it was time to troubleshoot the problem the way an electrician would, trace the circuit back to the source. For the next week, I buried myself in county records, researching property laws, pulling old files, learning more legal jargon than I ever cared to. And what I discovered changed everything. Karen's real estate license. Already had 2 prior violations, for misrepresenting property boundaries to clients. My Sarah always said, patterns reveal character. And Karen's pattern was clear as day. Even better, I found out the HOA's insurance policy had a specific exclusion: disputes with pre-existing, non-member properties weren't covered. Some lawyer, somewhere, had been smarter than Karen realized. And then came the jackpot. A Freedom of Information Act request revealed that Karen's husband's dental practice owed $127,000 in back taxes. No wonder she was desperate to squeeze money out of her neighbors. That was the moment I realized she hadn't just picked the wrong neighbor, she'd picked the wrong widower to mess with. Karen's threats weren't just talk, they were the opening salvo in a campaign that quickly turned into all-out war. 2 mornings after my FOIA jackpot, I found a bright orange slip nailed to my front gate. Big block letters across the top screamed, "Notice of Violation." It accused me of maintaining an unapproved structure, and ordered me to tear down my workshop within 30 days. 30 days. That shop had stood since 1992. It was older than half the people living in Meadowbrook Estates. Voltage growled low as I ripped the paper off the wood. I could picture Karen's smug face as she typed it up on her HOA letterhead, probably believing the official font gave her godlike power. That night, I drove into town and met my old buddy Mike O'Connor at Murphy's Diner. Mike and I had wired half the county together back in the 90s. He was a big, barrel-chested guy with a laugh that shook the booths. After hearing me out, he leaned across the sticky tabletop, coffee steaming between us. "Jake, this lady's poked the wrong bear. You've got the paperwork, you've got the history, and hell, you've got half the town on your side. She's bluffing. But if you let her push, she'll keep pushing." Mike was right. So I called up Frank Delgado, an attorney I'd once done electrical work for back when he was fresh out of law school. He owed me a favor, or at least a good rate. Frank specialized in property rights cases, the kind of lawyer who could spot a forged document from 10 paces. When I dropped the HOA letters on his desk, Frank's eyebrows shot up. "Jake, this is gold. They don't have jurisdiction over your parcel, plain and simple. Every threat, every letter, every fine they've sent, it's harassment. Document everything from this point forward. Dates, times, screenshots, the whole works." So I did. Every slip of paper. Every photo. Every neighbor's story of being targeted. I built a binder so thick it could have doubled as a cinder block. The more I dug, the uglier it got. Karen had fined one neighbor $150 for leaving a pickup truck in his driveway. She slapped a $75 architectural violation on a teacher because her garden had too many wildflowers. An elderly couple got hit with $200 for painting their fence the wrong shade of brown. It wasn't just me, she was running the neighborhood like her personal fiefdom. Word spread fast once people saw me pushing back. At first, they'd drop by quietly, almost embarrassed. A knock on my door, a whispered complaint, a manila folder of letters slipped into my hands. But soon, my cabin porch turned into a gathering place. On Friday nights, neighbors showed up with coffee thermoses and lawn chairs. Mrs. Henderson brought oatmeal raisin cookies that tasted like something out of a childhood dream. Voltage played with kids chasing fireflies while parents compared their latest violations. We laughed, we vented, and for the first time since Sarah's passing, I felt like I wasn't alone. Karen had tried to isolate me, but all she'd done was build me a community. Karen, of course, noticed. 2 weeks later, she called an emergency HOA meeting. Flyers went out screaming about the Riverside problem. Her goal: to convince the board to approve private security patrols and surveillance cameras, directed at me. 47 people showed up, the largest turnout in Meadowbrook history. I didn't attend, but Mrs. Henderson sat through the whole circus and gave me the play-by-play later. "Jake, you should have seen it," she said, shaking her head. "Karen was pacing like a general before battle, calling you an environmental extremist, and a threat to property values. Half the room walked out before she even finished her speech. By the next morning, she'd been banned from the neighborhood Facebook group for harassment. Her farewell post, a rambling rant about ungrateful neighbors destroying community standards, was screenshotted and shared like wildfire. People laughed more than they argued. But the real turning point came when I got a call from Denver. Her name was Rebecca Torres, an investigative journalist working on a series about HOA corruption. She'd caught wind of my story through county filings and wanted to meet. Rebecca showed up in a dusty Subaru with boxes of public records crammed into the back seat. She wasn't the type to mince words. "Jake, I've been chasing HOA abuse cases across the state, but yours? It's the perfect storm: fraud, harassment, property rights. This isn't just your fight anymore. It's part of a bigger pattern." I'll admit, part of me didn't want the spotlight. I wasn't looking for fame, just peace. But Sarah always believed in standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. So I told Rebecca everything. She listened, scribbled notes, and then pulled out a folder that made my stomach flip. "Did you know Meadowbrook Estates was built on land with unresolved treaty claims?" she asked. I blinked. "Come again." Rebecca explained, back in the 1800s, the federal government never formally settled water and mineral rights with the Arapaho Nation. Every deed in the development had a legal cloud hanging over it. And guess what? My parcel. Specifically excluded, thanks to some sharp-eyed surveyor decades earlier. Translation: Karen's HOA wasn't just overstepping, they were standing on shaky legal ground from the start. Rebecca wasn't the only one bringing ammunition. Judge Robert Crenshaw, a retired county judge and old friend of Mike's, joined the cause. He'd been quietly combing through incorporation documents and financial records. His findings: explosive. The HOA had blown through over $230,000 in legal and consulting fees in just 3 years. A fat chunk of that, $85,000, ended up funneled into Karen's own real estate business under the label of management commissions. Even worse, the HOA's incorporation documents were riddled with fraud. 3 signatures belonged to people who didn't even live in Meadowbrook at the time. Karen had forged the papers to crown herself queen. Judge Crenshaw laid it out plainly: "She hasn't just been harassing you, Jake. She's been stealing from everyone." It was time to go on the offensive. We built a team that felt like something out of a movie. Frank handled the property rights lawsuit. Judge Crenshaw dug into civil rights claims for residents harassed into compliance. Rebecca chased the money trail like a bloodhound. And then came Marcus Littlefeather, a legal advocate from the Arapaho Nation, who arrived with century-old maps proving treaty violations that could unravel the entire development. Mike, never one to sit back, added his own touch. He upgraded my security with military-grade cameras, facial recognition, and encrypted backups that uploaded directly to Frank's office. If Karen wants a spy game, he grinned, let's play it smarter. We launched a 3-pronged strategy. Sue for harassment and defamation. Prove HOA fraud and embezzlement. Drop the nuclear option, tribal sovereignty claims that could invalidate the whole subdivision. Rebecca's research uncovered even more dirt. Karen had siphoned $127,000 through shell companies, fake landscaping invoices, and consulting contracts with businesses that didn't exist. "This isn't HOA nonsense anymore," Rebecca said. "This is federal embezzlement. The FBI doesn't ignore that kind of evidence." Meanwhile, the community rallied. Murphy's Diner became our war room. Over bacon and eggs, neighbors swapped testimony, pooled evidence, and mapped out strategies. Mrs. Henderson organized carpools for folks willing to testify. I drafted a homeowner accountability toolkit that went viral after Rebecca featured it in her series. It spread like wildfire. Demand financial audits. Insist on proof of authority. Document everything. State databases even crashed from homeowners suddenly checking their own HOAs. My once isolated fight had ignited a statewide reckoning. But Karen wasn't done swinging. She hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on me. My cameras caught him trespassing 3 times in 2 days, rifling through my mailbox and snapping photos through windows. Detective Martinez from the sheriff's office reviewed the footage and shook his head. "That's federal mail theft, Jake. She's digging her own grave." Her next move? Outright bribery. She tried slipping $5,000 in cash to a county inspector to discover violations in my solar system. Rebecca's hidden mic recorded the entire exchange. Within hours, the inspector turned her in. Still, Karen doubled down. She organized a so-called concerned citizens protest outside my property. Professionally printed signs, chants about protecting property values. 7 people showed up. 5 were her family. By afternoon, Mrs. Henderson had gathered 43 counter-protesters carrying signs that read, "Stop HOA Tyranny," and "Property Rights Matter." Local TV covered it, and Karen looked like a fringe cult leader yelling into the wind. She tried one last desperate shot, filing an ethics complaint against Frank, claiming he was running a frivolous lawsuit for personal gain. The state bar dismissed it in 2 days and opened an investigation into her false filings instead. Through it all, I kept my cool. Sarah's words guided me, "Don't let bullies turn you into something you're not." So I stayed calm, collected evidence, and let Karen keep hanging herself. By now, Rebecca's stories had gone national. Cable news picked up the saga as the poster child for HOA abuse. Donations to our legal fund doubled overnight. And Karen? She appeared on live TV, sweating under the lights, spinning wild excuses. Forged signatures were clerical errors. Missing money was accounting mistakes. The bribery? Just a misunderstood donation. The internet shredded her. Hashtags like #KarenLies trended for days. Her empire was cracking wide open. And we were just getting started. Karen's empire wasn't just wobbling now, it was beginning to crumble under its own weight. Her carefully polished image as Meadowbrook's protector of property values was disintegrating. Neighbors who once nodded politely at her morning jogs now crossed the street to avoid her. Those who used to sit on the HOA board with her were resigning one by one, unwilling to be dragged into the storm. But the most devastating blows didn't come from outside critics, they came from within her own circle. 3 more residents stepped forward, each with eerily similar stories of harassment. One was a schoolteacher fined for her non-compliant wildflower garden. Another, a retiree, had been slapped with penalties for staining his fence with the wrong shade of sealant. A single father had been threatened with foreclosure for keeping his pickup truck visible in his own driveway. Their testimonies matched mine almost word for word. Karen hadn't been running a neighborhood association. She'd been running a dictatorship. Meanwhile, my cabin porch had become something unexpected, a gathering place. People who had once been strangers now came to share coffee, trade gardening tips, and tell their own stories of Karen's overreach. Voltage ran circles around the yard, chasing kids with squeaky toys, while neighbors laughed in the very place that had once felt so empty after Sarah passed. In trying to isolate me, Karen had accidentally united the community against her. But she didn't back down, she doubled down. Another emergency meeting was called, this time to discuss increased security measures for neighborhood safety. What that really meant was putting me under surveillance. The turnout? The biggest in Meadowbrook's history. 47 people filled the meeting hall. I didn't go, but Mrs. Henderson, bless her heart, sat in the back with a tape recorder hidden in her purse. Later, she delivered a fresh batch of cookies and the play-by-play. "Jake, you should have heard her," she said, rolling her eyes. She was ranting about environmental extremists and property rights terrorists. Half the room left before she even finished. One man stood up and told her flat out, "This isn't why we moved here. The very next morning, Karen's name was wiped from the Meadowbrook Facebook group after moderators cited her for harassment. Her farewell post, a barely coherent rant about neighbors destroying community values, was screenshotted and shared like a joke at her expense. Still, Karen didn't seem to recognize how far she was falling. Rebecca Torres, the Denver journalist, smelled blood in the water. She came back with thicker files, sharper questions, and a determination I'd come to admire. She explained that my case wasn't isolated, it was part of a wider trend of HOAs overstepping across the state. Then she dropped the bombshell that changed everything: the land beneath Meadowbrook Estates had never been fully cleared in federal records. The Arapaho Nation still had unsettled claims to mineral and water rights. And my parcel? It had been deliberately excluded decades earlier because the surveyor knew better than to entangle it in legal quicksand. In other words, Karen's HOA wasn't just harassing me, they were sitting on a foundation of sand. Meanwhile, Judge Crenshaw's investigation peeled back even more layers of corruption. Financial records subpoenaed from the HOA revealed something jaw-dropping: over $230,000 in legal and consulting expenses had been drained from residents' dues in just 3 years. And where had a big slice of that money gone? Straight into Karen's own real estate company. Labeled as management commissions. She wasn't just abusing power, she was enriching herself. Even the paperwork that gave life to the HOA was fraudulent. 3 of the signatures belonged to people who hadn't even lived in Meadowbrook when the incorporation supposedly took place. The conclusion was unavoidable: Karen had forged the very documents that gave her the gavel she swung so recklessly. The state attorney general, already sniffing around similar scams, now had Karen's name on their list. Frank nearly choked laughing when I laid it all out at Murphy's Diner. "Jake, she's not just overreaching. She's a crook. And crooks leave trails." That's when we formalized the plan. Our dream team solidified. Frank led the harassment countersuit. Judge Crenshaw prepared civil rights claims for residents who'd been bullied. Rebecca worked day and night, filing FOIA requests and tracing money through shell companies. And then came Marcus Littlefeather, the Arapaho advocate. He arrived with rolled-up treaty maps dating back to the 1800s. He laid them flat on my kitchen table, pointing at boundary lines older than Colorado itself. "Your HOA just woke up a nightmare," Marcus said. "One they can't buy their way out of." Meanwhile, Mike wasn't content to watch from the sidelines. He installed a security system at my place that would have made a bank jealous: motion sensors, hidden cameras, encrypted backups. "If she wants evidence," he said with a grin, "we'll give it to her. Except it'll be evidence of her crimes." Rebecca's reporting uncovered the final twist of the knife: $127,000 siphoned into shell companies through fake landscaping invoices and consulting contracts with businesses that didn't exist. "This isn't HOA abuse anymore," she told me flatly. "This is embezzlement. And it's federal. The FBI doesn't ignore that kind of thing. We organized like generals preparing for battle. Evidence binders. Timeline charts. Flow diagrams of where money flowed and how signatures were faked. Everything neat, cataloged, undeniable. Rebecca helped me launch the Property Rights Defense Fund, a crowdfunding campaign that raised $75,000 in its first week. Donations poured in from people across the country who were sick of HOA tyranny. And the diner? It wasn't just a place for breakfast anymore. It was our war room. People shared testimony, organized carpools, and strategized over bacon and eggs. Mrs. Henderson brought pies and moral support. Mike recruited his nephew, who worked in private security, to train neighbors on documenting harassment properly. The movement had grown far beyond me. But Karen wasn't finished, not by a long shot. She hired a private investigator to follow me. My cameras caught him snooping through my mail, trespassing in my yard, and taking photos through my windows. Detective Martinez from the sheriff's department didn't need convincing. "That's federal mail theft," he said after reviewing the footage. And she's liable, too, for hiring him. Her next attempt was pure bribery. She slid $5,000 across a desk to County Inspector Rodriguez, hoping he'd discover violations in my solar setup. What she didn't know was that Rebecca had wired Rodriguez with a hidden mic. The whole exchange was recorded. Within hours, Rodriguez turned her over to the district attorney. Her desperation only grew. She staged a protest outside my cabin, complete with printed signs and chants about protecting property values. 7 people came. 5 were family. That same afternoon, Mrs. Henderson organized a counter-protest with 43 supporters. Their handmade signs read, "Stop HOA Tyranny," and "Property Rights Matter." Local TV crews showed up, and Karen ended up looking like a fringe zealot yelling into the void. Her last Hail Mary. Filing an ethics complaint against Frank, claiming he was enriching himself through frivolous lawsuits. The state bar dismissed it in 2 days flat, and opened an investigation into her for false reporting. And through it all, I kept calm. Sarah's words stayed with me, "Don't let bullies turn you into something you're not." The world was watching now. Rebecca's series caught national attention. My story went viral online. Property rights groups reached out, offering support. Cable news ran segments calling Meadowbrook the face of HOA abuse in America. Meanwhile, Karen's carefully crafted image collapsed in real time. She appeared on live television, sweat dripping under studio lights, spinning wild excuses. Forged signatures. Clerical errors. Missing money. Accounting mix-ups. Bribery. A misunderstood donation. The internet wasn't buying it. Hashtags like #KarenLies and #HOATyrant trended for days. Donations to the defense fund doubled. Her empire was burning down, and she was the one holding the matches. By now, Karen's grip on Meadowbrook Estates had snapped like a brittle twig. Her real estate license was suspended after the bribery scandal hit the district attorney's desk. 3 HOA board members resigned in quick succession, each one more eager than the last to distance themselves from her sinking ship. Without insurance, the HOA was floundering, policies were cancelled outright after carriers cited criminal misconduct by leadership. And then came the blow Karen never saw coming. Her own husband, Dr. Whitmore, filed for divorce. He claimed she'd forged his name on multiple HOA contracts, dragging him into legal liabilities he wanted nothing to do with. The man had tolerated her antics for years, but even he had a breaking point. The woman who once paraded through the neighborhood like royalty was suddenly standing alone. Meanwhile, the development itself was unraveling. For sale signs sprouted like weeds as families bailed before property values plummeted further. Moving trucks lined the curbs. The dream of Meadowbrook Estates was disintegrating before everyone's eyes. For me, life was changing too. What began as a lonely fight had grown into a cause much bigger than myself. My front porch, once just the quiet place Sarah and I used to sip coffee, was now a symbol. Neighbors gathered there not out of pity, but out of solidarity. Businesses in town hung "We Stand with Jake" signs in their windows. Church groups prayed openly for justice. But if anyone thought Karen was finished, they underestimated the depth of her desperation. Her next move was beyond reckless, it was deranged. She filed a petition with the county mental health office, claiming I was unstable, paranoid, and stockpiling weapons for some impending standoff. She even produced sworn statements from 3 neighbors I'd never spoken to in my life. Had the judge rubber-stamped it, I'd have been involuntarily committed for 72 hours. Instead, Dr. Patricia Kim, the court-appointed psychologist, conducted the evaluation. After spending 2 hours on my porch, sipping coffee while voltage snoozed at her feet, she wrote a report so sharp it cut through Karen's lies like glass. Mr. Riverside is not only mentally sound, he demonstrates remarkable resilience given the persistent harassment he has endured. This petition appears to be an abuse of mental health procedures for personal vendetta. Strike 1. Karen didn't even pause. Her next gambit was an EPA complaint. She claimed my solar batteries were leaking toxins into the soil and my septic system was polluting groundwater. The inspector who arrived looked prepared to condemn a wasteland. What he found instead? The cleanest, most carefully maintained off-grid system in the county. My well water tested so pure he said it should be bottled. Sir, he told me with a grin, I wish every property in Colorado was this safe. Yours ought to be the model. Strike 2. Then came the most outrageous stunt of all, she tried weaponizing eminent domain. With the few remaining board members still under her thumb, she pushed through a resolution declaring my property blighted and petitioned the county to seize it for community safety. The county attorney laughed her out of the building. HOAs don't have eminent domain authority, she said, shaking her head. And Mr. Riverside's land is the opposite of blight. It's one of the best-kept properties in the district. Strike 3. But Karen wasn't finished swinging. She delivered a fat dossier to Sheriff Thompson, alleging I was some kind of domestic extremist. Pages of fabricated evidence, half of it pulled from my YouTube videos about renewable energy, twisted to sound sinister. She painted me as anti-government, a lone wolf, a threat. Thompson wasn't fooled. He'd known me for years. He flipped through the file, tossed it on his desk, and told her point blank, "Ma'am, filing false terrorism reports is a federal felony. Don't waste my time again." That was the tipping point. Her campaign of harassment had officially crossed from nuisance into delusion. The psychologist reported her for abusing mental health laws. The EPA inspector lodged a complaint about false reporting. The county attorney requested a review of her actions for misuse of government processes. And on our side, we were stronger than ever. Frank compiled our evidence into an airtight package, 847 pages thick. Every letter, every notice, every trespass captured by Mike's cameras. A trail of missing funds that couldn't be explained away. Marcus's treaty maps proving Meadowbrook sat on land still entangled in sovereignty disputes. The support from the community had swelled into a wave Karen couldn't stop. Businesses donated supplies. Veterans groups honored me for defending constitutional property rights. Local schools invited me to teach workshops on renewable energy. My once derided cabin had become a classroom, a gathering place, a symbol. The HOA board, what was left of it, finally voted unanimously to strip Karen of her title. She was banned from meetings, effectively exiled from the very empire she had built. Her finances collapsed soon after. The Bank of Colorado foreclosed on her McMansion when she defaulted on loans and legal fees stacked sky-high. The irony was delicious, the woman who had tried to take my land lost her own home. And then came the final nail. Her estranged husband turned over boxes of evidence, contracts she had forged in his name, invoices she had falsified, accounts she had drained. His testimony was the puzzle piece prosecutors had been waiting for. Rebecca's reporting went national. She won an Investigative Journalism Award for the series, and lawmakers in 3 states began drafting new legislation to crack down on HOA overreach. Colorado's version was dubbed Jake's Law. Through it all, I kept my head down, just like Sarah would have wanted. I didn't rant, didn't gloat, didn't let the anger define me. I just kept documenting, kept preparing, kept waiting. And finally, the day came. The courthouse was packed wall to wall. Reporters jostled for space beside neighbors, activists, even curious passers-by who had followed the story online. Judge Morrison presided, a no-nonsense veteran of 30 years on the bench. Karen shuffled in late, dragging her 4th lawyer in 6 months, a nervous-looking man clutching papers like a lifeline. She looked haggard, her designer clothes hanging loose, dark circles under her eyes. Her lawyer tried his best. "Your Honor, my client seeks enforcement of legitimate HOA authority over non-compliant property threatening community standards." The judge cut him off before he could even finish. "Do you have any evidence that Mr. Riverside's property was ever under HOA jurisdiction?" The lawyer stammered, shuffled papers, and finally admitted he did not. That's when Frank stood, calm as a mountain. He laid out my 1987 deed, the survey maps, the exemption records. He showed years of trespassing footage, every fraudulent notice, every forged document. Rebecca presented the financial trail, over $312,000 siphoned into Karen's pockets. Marcus dropped the hammer with treaty maps that nullified the HOA's authority altogether. Karen tried to whisper frantically to her lawyer. Then she gestured wildly, stood, and finally shouted, "This is about property values. He's destroying our community." The judge's gavel cracked down. "Sit down or you will be removed." And when Frank presented the bribery recordings and false police reports, Karen lost all composure. She ranted about environmental extremists and property terrorists until the bailiff escorted her out of the courtroom. Then came the ruling. Judge Morrison's voice was steady, but every word landed like a hammer. "This is the most egregious abuse of HOA authority I have seen in my 30 years on the bench. Mr. Riverside's property was never under their jurisdiction. The incorporation documents contain forgeries. The financial records show systematic embezzlement. The pattern of harassment rises to the level of criminal conspiracy." With one strike of the gavel, the HOA was dissolved. Karen was ordered to pay $127,000 in damages and attorney's fees. And most importantly, her case was referred directly to federal prosecutors. The room erupted. Neighbors cheered. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. I just sat there, quiet, Sarah's words echoing in my mind, "Don't let them change who you are." The fight was over. But the ripple effects were only beginning. 6 months after Judge Morrison's gavel fell, the saga that had consumed our lives finally reached its closing chapters. Karen Whitmore, once Queen Bee of Meadowbrook Estates, now stood in federal court as just another defendant. The charges were stacked high: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, bribery, falsifying legal documents, harassment, and abuse of process. The courtroom atmosphere was different this time. No shouting, no theatrics, just the heavy quiet of inevitability. Her lawyers shuffled through binders, but their arguments were paper-thin. The prosecution, armed with reams of evidence we'd collected, dismantled her defenses piece by piece. The judge's sentence came down hard. 18 months in federal prison. Restitution of $427,000 to cover stolen funds, damages, and court costs. Permanent revocation of her real estate license. And a recommendation for further investigation into tax evasion tied to her husband's business. This court cannot ignore the sustained campaign of harassment, deceit, and financial abuse carried out by Ms. Whitmore under the guise of community leadership, the judge said firmly. This behavior is incompatible with the principles of trust and responsibility upon which neighborhoods are built. The sound of the gavel marked the end of Karen's empire. She lost everything. Her marriage collapsed completely, the divorce finalized with her ex-husband's damning testimony. Her house was foreclosed and auctioned off for half its former value. Her once spotless reputation as a real estate agent was destroyed forever. From Queen of Meadowbrook, she'd fallen to a disgraced ex-president with nothing but a prison record and a mountain of debt she'd never crawl out from under. Word eventually spread that she moved out of state, working retail under a different name. To most people, she became just another cautionary tale. But for the rest of us, life was just beginning again. The very first vote after Karen's downfall dissolved the HOA completely. No more dues, no more fines, no more committees measuring grass or timing trash cans. The people of Meadowbrook reinvented themselves as a voluntary neighborhood association. If you wanted to help, you helped. If you didn't, nobody came knocking. And something amazing happened. Without Karen's iron fist, people actually came together. Neighbors planted gardens. Kids rode bikes freely again without parents worrying about noise complaints. Families hosted cookouts in their yards without fear of citations. The land Karen once called an eyesore became the pride of the valley. My cabin, solar panels, and gardens were featured in Solar Energy Today, under the headline, Off-Grid Living, How One Man's Fight Against an HOA Sparked a Sustainable Revolution. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The Property Rights Defense Fund, which Rebecca helped launch, grew beyond anything I imagined. What started as a crowdfunding campaign became a nonprofit with real traction. We offered legal scholarships to families fighting unjust HOAs, funded property rights clinics, and built a statewide network of advocates. Judge Crenshaw himself chaired the scholarship committee, handpicking cases where our support could make the difference between losing a home and keeping it. Within a year, 12 families across 3 states had won their fights, thanks to the playbook born from our struggle. Lawmakers took notice too. Bills were introduced across the country to rein in abusive HOAs. Colorado passed the strongest version, quickly nicknamed Jake's Law. It criminalized fraudulent fines, required financial transparency for associations, and created penalties for false reporting. Suddenly, HOAs couldn't act like tiny dictatorships anymore, not without consequences. Rebecca's career skyrocketed. Her series on HOA corruption won her a National Journalism Award, and she published a best-selling book called Curb Appeal, The Hidden Cost of HOAs. She always gave credit where it was due, reminding readers that this story wasn't about her reporting, it was about ordinary neighbors standing up to abuse. As for me, life took a turn I never expected. My YouTube channel, which started as a small outlet to vent and document, ballooned past 300,000 subscribers. People tuned in for advice on property rights, off-grid living, and resilience against HOA harassment. I ended every video the same way. Document everything. Know your rights. And never let bullies turn you into something you're not. But the biggest victory wasn't legal, financial, or political, it was personal. Sarah and I had always dreamed of turning our land into something bigger than just a home. She wanted it to be a place where kids could learn, explore, and fall in love with nature. Thanks to the outpouring of community support, that dream finally came true. The local school district partnered with me to create the Renewable Energy Learning Center right on our property. Every week, busloads of kids visited, wide-eyed as they toured the solar arrays, tinkered with small turbines, and learned how sustainable living worked in real life. Their laughter echoed across the fields, filling spaces that once felt so empty after losing Sarah. And I could almost hear her voice in the wind, telling me this was what she'd always wanted. The changes spread beyond my fence line too. The old, common areas that Karen had jealously guarded were repurposed into a community garden and wildlife preserve. Families planted vegetables together, and birdwatchers marveled at how quickly the ponds became habitats for migrating species. Voluntary cooperation accomplished more in 6 months than Karen's regime had achieved in 3 years. Even Voltage, my loyal mutt, became a local celebrity. Kids adored him. He ended up with his own Instagram account, run by a neighbor's teenage daughter, that attracted tens of thousands of followers. He was the unofficial mascot of our newfound freedom. And as neighbors worked side by side, bonds grew where suspicion once festered. Mike volunteered to upgrade everyone's home security for free. Mrs. Henderson continued her tradition of cookies, dropping them off during her evening walks. Community cookouts, concerts, and holiday gatherings blossomed without anyone worrying about HOA citations. From the ashes of Karen's tyranny, a real community finally took root. And me? I found peace again. On cool evenings, I'd sit on the porch where Sarah and I once dreamed together, listening to the sound of neighbors laughing around the fire pit she never got to see finished. The grief that had weighed so heavily on me for years had transformed into something else, a sense of belonging. Sarah always said, good people find each other when times get tough. She was right. The fight for property rights isn't over. I get emails and letters every week from people across the country dealing with their own HOA nightmares. A veteran in Texas facing harassment over his service dog. A Native American family fighting to preserve a ceremonial garden their HOA wanted bulldozed. A single mom in Florida threatened with foreclosure over the color of her shutters. My porch stays open. Just like Sarah would have wanted. And that's why I share this story with you. Because it's not just mine, it belongs to everyone who's ever been told they don't belong on their own land. So if you've ever gone head-to-head with an HOA, drop your story in the comments. Maybe it'll be the one we cover in next week's episode of HOA Stories. And if you believe in defending property rights, smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a tale of justice served. Because Sarah was right about one thing, bullies always lose in the end. And good people, they always find each other.